Nate, you said you want to go first? All right, I'm going to make you the host. You can pull up your slide. Are you afraid of recording? I can turn off the recording if you don't want it. Some people want a copy of it. Oh, now that you say that, I wonder if my YouTube video got updated. There we go. I need to figure out how to make like a YouTube channel that's private so I don't have to send you guys a link every week. But the videos are just there, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do this unpublished things. But this is a big stretch for me, this whole putting stuff on YouTube. Yeah, you should go on Facecam. We want to see your pictures, your faces. I'm so glad to see people here yesterday. Only Brady and Louisa did their presentation yesterday. There's 38 of you. There's no way 36 of you are presenting today. I think some people didn't do it. But there you go. Yes, I'm glad. Patience, I'm glad you did it. All right, it's exactly 8. So for time's sake, it's all you, Nate. I'm gonna mute myself. And Henry, okay. I love your tapestry behind you. Love tapestries.
Okay. So I will start. But first, I need to figure out how to share screen again.
The bottom center of your screen, you should see a little green button that says share.
Yes, I found it. Okay. There we go. Okay. I'm going on now. I can't see you guys. Okay. Now I begin. All right. So the topics I mainly focus on in the media that the media covered was the Cohen hearings and the Hanoi summit with Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. I split the slide in half according to the agenda that they were setting, and I just broke it into a good Trump, bad Trump emojis for fun. Now, these news sources, I have this is the news sources here, left to right, on the good Trump, bad Trump scale. It's oversimplified because I think the Wall Street, I put the Wall Street Journal in bold because they were watching Trump over the Hanoi summit because they thought he did a not so great job there. Anyways, so on the Cohen hearing, I can't see my own slide. The Cohen hearing. So the first night I was reading the news on the Cohen hearing. I watched Fox News, and they were covering the Hanoi summit, and I'll get to their coverage on that later. But CNN, they were talking on Don Lemon's show, late night show. They were talking about how a Republican used a black woman as a token, or tokenizing black folks, and they were calling them hysterical. So they were really framing this issue. They were really setting their agenda here that Republicans are racist. more on the Cohen hearing, the Sky News, which this was on World News, and I'm not sure why, because there was other more pressing issues on the world stage that they could have covered. For example, India and Pakistan, with Pakistan shooting down 3 fighter warplanes of India and taking them custody, and yet that was below the Cohen hearing coverage, which was a little surprising to me. Sky News was calling Mobster Trump attacked by ex-lawyer in explosive testimony. I put the parts where I thought they were framing the issue in bold there. And then Fox News, that's the noise on it. Never mind. So they're framing the issue there. They're really beefing up the Cohen hearing to support their agenda. And another interesting thing, whereas the Republicans, the good Trump side of the on the sound bites where Cohen said, "I know nothing of Russian collusion," and stuff that was like, why are we even here? Because Cohen hearing again is supposed to be about the Russian stuff. Sky News, BBC, they focused on the sound bites where Cohen said, "I think Trump was telling me to lie in his way," which is very shaky legal ground and probably cannot be prosecuted. Anyways, moving on to the Hanoi summit because I'm going long. This was interesting because Fox News was just fawning over Trump here. Like, it was historic. It was brilliant. It was unbelievable. And even after it was over and he came out with no deal, Trump was still brilliant and amazing for backing out of the deal. So he goes in, he's brilliant. He backs out. He's still brilliant, even though there's no deal. Whereas on the bad Trump, I actually agree with the bad Trump side. This news cycle here, that it was a failure, not just a stumble, which is what the Washington Times reported. Trump keeps faith despite summit stumble. And so there's that comparison where Fox News, Washington Times, it's stumble, or even fantastic, where you see Sky News they're really going after him, and like, well, shocker, you're going after him. But the reason it was good, how it was a failure of planning negotiation. So that's what I saw in the news, and just a couple honorable mentions. The Jussie Smollett, which happened a couple weeks last week, I think it was. That was a good example of a feeding frenzy in the media. Well, it's kind of almost beyond a feeding frenzy, and I didn't put this in my slide because I didn't have room. Because they hear a story, and without corroboration, they just jump on it and basically eat a nothing burger, which is not a good look for them. And one last thing I will add. That's me. I know Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo is me over this whole news cycle and the Hanoi summit. And that's all I had.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah, there's actually a lot of... Go ahead.
7 minutes. Last night, whenever I was going over it, I did like talking to myself for like 15.
You can go. That's okay if you're 7 minutes. That's good enough. But it has been an interesting week, right? Lots of things going on.
Oh yeah,
and
definitely, and lots of things where you really saw the agenda setting, because the Cohen hearings, which is relatively minor compared to the Hanoi summit, which wasn't covered at all,
right,
in what I watched on CNN, and the Pakistan-India conflict, which is 2 nuclear-armed countries. That was, it's gone already.
Yeah,
You can see it.
the India-Pakistan thing is incredibly pivotal to the world stage. I mean, it's,
Right?
major brinksmanships going on. So it is interesting. And also priming, how are they dealing with this?
Priming the issue.
When you think about the issue of the summit, whether something happened or not, just because they didn't come out of there with an agreement, that doesn't necessarily mean the president did a bad job there. An agreement may not have been able to be had, but how can we have to frame everything in winners and losers instead of addressing, what are the bigger issues and doing it? So
Right.
it's to sell things. But who would like to go next? Ramsey, all right. Ramsey, we heard from your sister yesterday. Oh, I have to claim my host back and then make you the host. Don't worry about anybody's presentations being lame, you guys. This is just your classmates. You have it, Ramsey? Do you see where you are going to pull up your slide center?
Share screen.
There you go. All right, I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. Oh, the thing's in the way. Wait, I can make it go away.
Patience, do you want to mute yourself too, so we just have Ramsey unmuted? And then that'll be easier to not hear feedback.
Okay. Hang on. Let me actually. It's not very centered, but that is actually all it is on the side.
Okay.
I think the pictures are low. But anyways, I submitted mine on Tuesday, so a lot of my news stories and stuff are from the previous week, which was a lot of R. Kelly, and actually R. Kelly and then the Pope's 4-day summit about sexual crimes at the priesthood. And that was the main thing that stood out to me, was how the media knows that sexual crimes are a very prevalent and emotional thing for audiences today. So they know that that is something that they care about. And it may be some agenda setting in that sense, that kind of stuff is hyped up as it is. But that was a fair amount of 2 or 3, I think 3 of the nightly news programs I watched. And that was between CBS and NBC. But anyways, so first of all, R. Kelly, it's my first point, was some agenda setting. A celebrity was given prominence over the humanitarian struggles in Venezuela that were given, I think, maybe a 3rd or 4th or 5th storyline. And their story, the Venezuela story, was noted as humanitarian, problems, violence, like we're trying to get aid into another country. And so it may have been some framing there, because all of the videos shown were of people throwing things and of violence and of people trying to get away, and the president yelling at the U.S. and things like that. But there was still R. Kelly's case placed front and center, because that bottom picture right there is that little opening story that they do, and that was February 23rd, when, I don't know who his name is, but he was taken over for Lester Holt. And like I said, so the Pope's 4-day seminar was the front and center story of the next night with Kate Snow, and other evidence that sexual crimes are given prominence because they're hot issues. So down to framing, I used my local paper, that is the Charlotte Observer from Charlotte, North Carolina, and an article on the morning that I submitted it was about a Beyond Scared Straight type thing. So basically a program to, in a way, save troubled teens. And the article, it was a video to snapshot, and a little kind of caption about it showed kids crying and like seemingly the police abusing children. Not that I condone that behavior in any way, but there is always a second side of the story. There was no testimony from people whose lives had been changed by it, nothing like that, just a headline that said this behavior is abusive, experts say, keyword experts in there. And then I think we all know about clickbait. clickbait in general seems to my dad personally, which I remember this as I went over it, enjoys Yahoo. And some of what I think the bad thing about clickbait might be is that it's such a sensational headline. When you read it and then you read the whole story, you think, oh, okay, I've just read the story. I just know what happened. Like that was exactly what happened. That was what it was taken through, but that's not necessarily true. So I think some of the danger with that is, you get a one-sided headline. But when you Google search just straight up Trump, just the word Trump, it brings up like 3 or 4 of those little stories on the end. It was from like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all kinds of stuff. So you see the credible papers underneath of them, and they'll say different things. Some of them are scathing. Some of them, again, good Trump, bad Trump, things like that, just depending on which it is. Yeah, so you do Google search that. I tried to keep the presentation a little bit shorter, so that is most of what I have. And so, yeah, framing. It's interesting because it's not necessarily blatant. The media is very subtle because they don't want you to think that they are framing the issue for you. They want you to think you arrive at the conclusion for yourself. And yes, sexual cases are very prevalent right now. Things people have hot opinions of. Oh, and something I did notice about my Charlotte Observer article, and something I had a Facebook account for like a week. So I realized this and saw this, but you can share a link to the video to the article right to Facebook without even having read it, just with the headlines. So I from what I had seen on Facebook for a little bit, I think that is also what some people do. So I don't know how to stop.
That's great. That's wonderful. So yeah, I think people actually do that on Facebook a lot. And I was seeing a clickbait this morning on Fox News. Actually, there was an article with a headline that said, let me see if I can pull it up. New twist on story about runner who killed the mountain lion with his bare hands. So I thought, oh, what is it? And then they say he was only a 3 to 6 month old lioness that was only about 50 pounds. I'm like, okay, but that's the guy's face, all right? So I'm not really sure how it's a new twist. I mean, his whole face got teared up by a lion, 50 pounds or not. I mean, I don't know. It's not like it's not the Jussie Smollett of lion wrestling, right? For real, he wrestled it. So who would like to go next? Ishan said he would, right? Yes, everybody should find it very interesting that the Pakistan-India thing is hardly covered at all. How can that possibly be?
Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
Okay, I'm back. I think the program shut down. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay. So while discussing the summit, Fox News consistently maintained an upbeat attitude, focusing on the positive performance of Trump over the past year, since the last summit, I mean, and the bright future for North Korea, like what both of them are going to improve as they come out of the summit. Additionally, they felt that cooperation between the two leaders was imminent, that they were very, well, they predicted that the denuclearization would take big steps towards getting finished. And then on the other hand, NBC News portrayed Kim Jong-un as an uncooperative dictator. Like they had the scenes where he was smoking and then one of his aides was running behind him to catch up with him. And they were just preying on all that. the dictator aspects of him rather than worrying about Trump. And they tried to portray him as someone who would be difficult to come to any kind of treaty with. And NBC didn't mention what Trump had done in the last few years, but they instead focused on the possibility of failure at the summit. Well, in their mind, what failure was, that denuclearization didn't happen. And they portrayed Trump, which was interesting to me, as wanting to achieve his goals, but not having the means or cooperation with Kim Jong-un to do so. And then after the summit, BBC World News labeled Trump as the biggest loser after he left the summit. This clearly reflects their frustration with Trump not being able to convince Kim Jong-un to denuclearize. They seem to criticize Trump for believing Kim Jong-un about Otto Warmbier's death. And about this loser thing, they portray him as the loser, but I wouldn't say he was the loser because he has to ensure that North Korea is denuclearized, right? I mean, they're a global threat if they're not denuclearized. And if he couldn't move towards that, he couldn't make any concessions on the U.S. side. So I think what he did was actually good because he's showing North Korea that he's not just going to let them push him over. The New York Times focused on what actually was occurring around the two leaders at the time of the summit, and they didn't focus on the past. They focused on what each country had to gain at the summit and to lose, obviously, and what they should have carried out since the last summit, which obviously North Korea didn't. The LA Times was skeptical of the possibility of any real denuclearization efforts by North Korea and was wary of Trump surrendering the Korean War and removing all of the American troops from South Korea, which is, I'm pretty sure, one of the things that Kim Jong-un probably asked Trump to do. But obviously he didn't do it. Yahoo and Google based most of their discussion of the summit on Reuters and AP and posted different news pages featuring Trump as they aggregated different ideas from various sources. As such, they did not display a clear political agenda, but they showed a wide range of ideas on the topic, which was nice, I thought. Okay, and the sources also differed in their portrayal of the Green New Deal. Fox showed the video of Cortez making her outlandish statement that we shouldn't have kids anymore because of climate change, which to me, that's infotainment. I know it's probably not, but to me, that is. Additionally, they showed the Feinstein-Cortez feud, and as a whole, they attempted to portray the Green New Deal as a big joke, which in my mind it is. Fox News also discussed the large sum of money required for the Green New Deal. On the other hand, NBC showed debates about the Green New Deal, like the one with Cortez and Ivanka Trump, and they didn't cast it as a silly suggestion. They gave it. They tried to respect it. Furthermore, without openly endorsing it, they attempted to add credibility to it. The New York Times had an opinion article in which they openly endorsed the Green New Deal, which was kind of reflective of their overall tone towards it. It seemed to be excited about the coming debates in the Green New Deal in the 2020 presidential elections. And it was glad for the potential of combating what they called the problem of climate change. Okay, the Los Angeles Times, on the other hand, remained fairly neutral. It did point out that the Green New Deal was more wishful than realistic. Like, I think one time they said it was a Democratic wish list. But they also acknowledged the importance that it will play during the 2020 elections. You know, that's going to be one of the big talking points during the elections. The Yahoo and Google discussion of the Green New Deal mainly focused on the controversy surrounding it by using excerpts from many articles from major news sources in order to compile a mix of opinions. They used NY, New York Times, CNN, Fox, NBC, CBS, all the major news channels they tried to bring articles from. So they obviously from that provided a variety of differing opinions. By choosing what to focus on, the sources subtly sent different messages to their viewers and created different narratives, all of which aligned with their agenda and political leanings. Also, the way in which things are presented is very important, as they can influence public opinion as well. Clearly, Fox News was conservative and NBC News was liberal, but it was definitely more moderate than Fox was. BBC News discussed world politics, obviously, not just American politics. As such, the summit was key on their agenda, and they were scathingly disappointed after the summit in their minds failed when Trump left without denuclearizing North Korea, because they expected him to do something that it was going to be very hard for him to do. The newspaper sources focused on the present and the future for these issues, while New York Times was very policy-oriented. The LA Times focused both on policy and on political narratives. They differed from the televised news sources in that they focused more energy on facts and less on personal character of the people, I mean. Then Yahoo and Google mainly took their sources from Reuters and sometimes from the AP. They conglomerated different sources, so they were very neutral as they provided a broad spectrum of ideologies and events. In order to ensure that we don't get stuck in an information bubble, we need to look at a variety of news sources. Thankfully, we have the advent of technology in order to gain access to lots of different viewpoints, so that we are constantly able to diversify our news sources from a host of viewpoints. In order to stay connected to daily happenings, we must stay connected to the news. This vital source informs citizens and allows us to gain knowledge about a host of events. Hold on, there's something else I want to show you. He was born last Friday. Just saying.
What's his name?
Glenn.
Aww.
All my Gov classmates think that he wasn't born, so I'm just showing them.
We can call that our infotainment, right?
Yeah.
You really should call him Spotted Cow or something, because look at that black and white. He looks so cute.
Yeah, he looks like his dad.
We had a black and white fish we used to call Cow. He jumped out of the pond, died. Oh, so cute. All right. Well, thank you, Ishan. That was really good, and glad to see you covering the Green New Deal. One of the things that's been interesting to me in the Green New Deal is that nobody's talking about like anything that's like got any meaningful detail of it. It's just pretty much the broad brush explanation. So like,
yeah, the only one that went in detail was NYT. They like talked about what it outlined, but the rest of them were just talking about like the broad brush, how much money it's going to cost, and the basic idea behind it.
Yeah, they're talking about universal health care for all this morning on the briefing, and 100 Democrats have proposed that, but there's absolutely no proposal for funding of it.
Yeah.
Pay for it. Ishan can pay for it.
They're probably going to get taxpayers to pay for it.
Yeah, I know, but how? Like, it's
so much money.
And when you determine as an organization how many nurses you need, how many doctors, and how much money you spend, the whole invisible hand of the market is gone. When you either have overcapacity or undercapacity, and you have no ability to respond to that. I mean, it really is the beauty of the free market. When people stop buying silly bands, you can stop producing them. All right, who wants to go next? Sorry, now you guys all know how I feel about health, private, public. We run healthcare. I did live in the UK. I did watch people die for no reason because they said, "Gee, we're not going to give you that care." I do love silly bands too, right? They were so much fun. Oh, okay, I forgot who said they wanted to be next. Anybody? Zach. All right, Zach, your host.
Okay, can you guys all hear me?
Yep, I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay, can you guys see the slide? Okay. So for my national news, I chose to do Fox and CNN. For my national papers, I did Washington Post and the Washington Times. For my international source, I did Al Jazeera, and my online-only sources, I did the Huffington Post and American Thinker. Okay, so as I said before, for my nightly news programs, I chose to analyze the special report with Bret Baier on Fox News and the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer on CNN. To start off, both channels are biased in my opinion, although I thought that Fox News was maybe a bit less biased towards conservatives than CNN was towards liberals. In my opinion, one prime example of the bias overall was their coverage of the Cohen trial on Wednesday. Almost all the Situation Room on CNN was spent covering the Cohen testimony, and bashing Trump. They also ran headlines that made Trump seem guilty, like he'd already committed a crime, such as House Oversight Committee, Trump appears to have committed a crime while in office. CNN repeatedly bashed him over hush money payments and the like while barely covering any other topics. On the other side of the spectrum, the special report spent more time covering the Hanoi summit, but they still spend the majority of their time on the Cohen testimony. Fox's agenda setting was less obvious, though. They still ran headlines like Russia investigation, Cohen attacks Trump but offers no evidence of collusion. Overall, Fox covered more on Cohen's credibility and lack of actual evidence, where CNN bashed the president over supposedly committing crimes in office. So for my national papers, I decided to assess the Washington Post and Washington Times. Like CNN and Fox, both papers are biased, although I thought the Post to be more so. The Times as a whole generally espoused more conservative ideals and often supported the president and attacked Democrats, while the Post was liberal and attacked President Republicans more than I think that the Time attacked Democrats. Both papers engaged in obvious framing and agenda setting, although I thought it was more prominent with the Post. Yesterday, the Post ran one article titled, "He Tells Me He Didn't Know, Trump Defends Kim Jong-un Over Death of Otto Warmbier." If that's not agenda setting, I don't know what is. The Times also did it trying to protect Trump, running such things as Chuck Schumer praises Trump for ditching North Korea talks. As a whole, I think that the Post was more biased than the Times, although the Times was still very biased. For my international news source, I chose to use the Qatari network Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera has a very significant, obvious Islamic bias. They are heavily anti-Israel, and they got the impression that they didn't especially care much for America. Yesterday, they ran an article titled "Criminalizing Anti-Zionism in France." In that article, the author would attack a proposed law that would criminalize anti-Zionism, and France claimed that as a political opinion, not anti-Semitism. He then went on to argue that Islamophobia never triggered such a response in France, calling the French government and intellectuals fear-mongering. Al Jazeera also ran several Israel-related articles recently in which they took an anti-Israel tone. Their reporting on the India-Pakistan crisis in Kashmir also had a pro-Pakistani opinion. So for my online-only sites, I chose to do the Huffington Post and American Thinker. Like all the other news sources I covered, they were heavily biased, although these were more so than all the others. The Huffington Post is extremely liberal, while the American Thinker is heavily conservative. Both these websites are on the fringes to most Americans. The American Thinker generally attacks Democrats and liberals, what they term coastal elites, while the Huffington Post constantly attacks Republicans and the president. Yesterday, the American Thinker ran an article titled "The Obliviousness and Conniving of the Democrat Party." While I agree with that, it's very biased. The Huffington Post also ran an article yesterday in an attempt to discredit the president titled "Donald Trump Has a Pattern of Trusting Dictators Over Experts." Headlines like that are very common with the Huffington Post, similar to as CNN. As a whole, I think that the Huffington Post was maybe slightly more biased towards the liberal side, although the American Thinker was most definitely heavily biased. Overall, today's media has become increasingly more biased, especially with more left-leaning outlets such as CNN or the Huffington Post, while the conservative-leaning outlets are just as guilty. This brings to mind the quote from Thomas Jefferson I found, when the press is impotent when it abandons itself to falsehood. Well, that concludes it. Thank you.
Great. Yes, that is a good quote, isn't it? All right. Great mix of sources. Who would like to go next? Who have we missed? Patience. Her Majesty the Queen. I'm teaching a etiquette class in a couple weeks to some young girls. I'm going to start that with, would you do that in front of the Queen? So on your screen share, you have a little green button now at the bottom. You should. You're the host.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, let me share the screen. Slide.
There you go. I'm going to mute myself.
Did I do that? Cool. Okay. All right. So, all right, we're going to start. The nightly news that I watched was evening news of CNN and the NBC nightly news. The evening news of CNN was probably the most biased source that I found. Well, the second most biased source. The first one's actually really funny. We'll get to that in a bit. They covered the Kim Trump summit, and they were very, very anti-Trump. Like, even before it happened, they were like, nothing's going to come of this. He's just wasting his time. What are we doing here? He was just very, very against Trump, and that was interesting. The NBC nightly news, though, I was pleasantly surprised. It actually wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Yeah, it was pretty... There was some subjectiveness in the sources they chose. Like, they'd show one source over another source. Like, well, here's an example with the guy who faked the... Well, they think he faked the attack. They showed a Twitter thing from his friend who was like, oh, he would never do this and stuff. But they didn't show anything from, like, the police. They were like, he most definitely did do this. So it was just selective information gathering. But it wasn't like the reporter came out and said Trump is the worst, which CNN did that. That was interesting. Okay. The Washington Post, yeah, like Ishan said, they were very anti-Trump. Like even just looking at the headlines, it was, yeah. I read one thing where it was about Venezuela and the blockage of humanitarian aid, and they were like all talking about, like, even before it happened, like, Trump's not going to provide anything. What's Trump doing about this? And I'm like, Trump has nothing to do with this, guys. But no. USA Today, this is my other national source, they talked about women being involved in the draft, and they seemed pleased and showed quotes from only those on one side of the issue, pro-women in the draft, and none on the other. There are actually a lot of really valid points against women in the draft, but they didn't show any of those. Instead, they just showed all the positive ones. You can tell which side I'm on in that argument. For international, I chose Associated Press. They focused almost entirely on the Kim Trump summit. And, yeah, the meeting place, like the coverage of the two leaders, what North Korea was like, what the US was like, it was literally very almost entirely based on the summit. They also talked about the child sex abuse accusations against the Pope, the Catholic Church in general, which, I mean, people like to cover that. So, reading the news makes me feel like I don't want to live in this world anymore. Okay, so for the online sources, and this is where it gets interesting, I chose two sources that were supposed to be good. BuzzFeed, which was, they didn't focus too much on news. It was more like celebrity gossip and like quizzes and stuff. It was a lot of clickbait. Skincare, gadgets, Instagram followings, Oscars, person getting kicked out of Facebook and Instagram for posting against Muslims. Yeah. I don't even know how much that's true. There was like a swamp in there. It's just like, okay, lots of news. And this is the really interesting one. This last one here, Truth Out. I looked up online sources to see like what people thought were the best ones, and Truth Out was on there. So I clicked on that and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go see this. Yeah. It was about, they didn't cover the summit very much. Their whole thing was about students with disabilities, racial, here's literally one of the headlines. Racial justice for Black people by turning away from middle-class white values. So, like, what is that supposed to mean? And it was mostly like a volunteer recruiting site. It was very, very liberal. More liberal than CNN. They really did not like Trump. They had the growing wealth gap between the working class. Ooh, it's very spooky. And yeah, that's what I analyzed. Wait, hold on. It was interesting to notice that the higher the readership or viewership or whatever went, with the exception of BuzzFeed, the lower the bias did as well. Like the more they covered. Like the international news had this could be due to my errors in sample size, but the international news had like the least bias, whereas like the national news had a little less, well, the nightly news had less than the national news. NBC did. I don't know. So that's interesting.
Hey, thank you very much, Patience. I'd be curious, two things for you guys. First of all, I've told my class for a number of years that this draft thing was going to happen because as soon as Barack Obama opened up the combat roles to all women, what do we know from the Supreme Court? What's the test for the Supreme Court for when you can discriminate against somebody based on gender? Remember? Does anyone remember? There's suspect class, and there's what's the test for that? Quasi-suspect, right. And so the state has to have a compelling intermediate scrutiny, exactly. So they had a compelling state interest in discriminating against women or discriminating against men, depending upon how you look at it. Requiring only men to register for the draft because you said and acknowledged that men and women are different in terms of their physical capability in order to fight wars. When Obama opened that up to everyone, it was now you're saying there is no physical disability or not disability, physical difference. And the interesting question that I have said for the last few years is it's really great if you say, well, people always make this argument, well, if she can do it, then we should let her. Like, if they can meet the standards, then we should let them. But it's a bigger and broader question than that. I mean, we know men's muscle size, bone density, and red blood cells are different between men and women. That's a fact. That's ontology. And so are you going to redo an entire logistical network for the one or two women who are possibly on the spectrum that are way over here? Because there's a bunch of men, they're on a continuum too that can't do it. But the bigger question back then that I said was not whether or not women can or cannot do it, but are women willing to be required to do it? And that's a question that the society as a whole may come to the answer, yes, we are, or no, we're not. But it's a very different question to say, go girl, if you want to be in the Rangers, you should be able to do it, versus everybody's daughter needs to sign up for the draft, right? Then people might say, wait a minute, because you can't say you just can be allowed and not be required if men are both allowed and required. Equality is equality, right? So as soon as that law passed, there was 2 cases immediately in the courts, men suing that they did not want to register for the draft. So I knew this was going to happen. It was going to come, and we'll see what comes of it. I'd be curious for all of you, while I'm asking this question, anybody who's left, tell me who'd like to go next. When you guys looked at these sources, we talk about bias, but which sources seemed more intellectual to you as well? Which ones were really, truly doing a good job of covering the news and addressing issues versus, because there's ones that certainly have a biased perspective. When you think of things like the American Thinker, they don't pretend they're not. They're essay writers in opinion pieces usually, but they're giving you information. And I think some of our news sources are more faithful at addressing an issue with facts than just having sound bites. I'd be curious. You think the Wall Street Journal? Yeah, I like the Wall Street Journal too. This Saturday's Wall Street Journal, in the electronics section, they have a little thing that you tape to the middle of your back and keep you from slouching. Every time you slouch, it gives you an electric shock. You put your shoulders back. It's $80, and I really do think I'm going to buy it. It seems like a good idea, right? It also will help you if you fall asleep in church or class. When you do this, right back up. I want to get a alarm clock that shocks my son too, because he just hits snooze 1,000 times and wakes the rest of us up. All right, back to Ella. Ella, do you have the host? And you should have a little center in the center to pull up your screen. Okay. Do you see that, Ella? There you go. All right, I'm going to mute myself.
Can you hear me? Wait, I can't even hear anyone. Hold on, this is confusing.
We can hear you. I just see a Zoom screen, so I don't know if you need to. There you go.
Okay, this is somebody else's. Sorry, technology is not my forte. There we go. Okay. All right, so I'm not sure if I did this in the right format because it looks different for anybody else's, but here it is. So I really enjoyed this project, and for me, it was actually really eye-opening as to like how blatant and like partial the messages that are conveyed throughout like all these news networks and outlets. So to begin, I want to explain my slide. So as you can see, I have like the logos for each of the networks that I watched. I watched CBS Television, Fox News, The Situation Room, BBC, Sky News, Hot Air, Huffington Post, Washington Times, and Wall Street Journal. And you can see the little stars that I put on each one. The blue stars mean that they are liberal, Democratic, and then the red means they are Republican. So yes, so I want to start broadly and talk about what I noticed in the type of topics and issues discussed within each different kind of outlet. Firstly, I saw that the nightly news differed from the international news. Where's the international news? These two. It differed from the international news networks in that the nightly news programs such as CBS and The Situation Room covered strictly national news. And not only national news, but from what I saw, only issues relating to the U.S. government. For example, both CBS and The Situation Room and Fox News reported about the national emergency Trump planned to declare. In contrast, international programs such as the BBC News and Sky News had a way broader perspective, unsurprisingly. Issues such as the terrible practice of FGM in South Africa and also the Vatican Child Abuse Summit, those topics were covered. There were, of course, headlines about America, but not nearly as present as in the nightly news programs. And this was not a surprise for me because, I mean, the nightly news sources were from America. So to continue, I want to dig a little deeper and address the relationships among the online news sources, the nightly news sources, and the newspaper news sources, and what kind of issues they covered. The topics themselves presented in all of these outlets were actually not significantly different. For the majority of the time, each of these different outlets discussed Trump-related issues. For example, there was a lot of talk within each about AOC and the Green New Deal and the national emergency, and also the testifying of Cohen, if that's how you say his name. However, despite these like commonalities, I did notice that the nightly news and the online news sources tended to be more clearly biased and more emotionally charged. And they also, I think they reflected less the opposing view. The newspapers, which were Wall Street Journal and Washington Times, those are the ones that I did, while they were clearly partial to the Democrats, they did seem at least to try to be a little more scholarly and like intellectual. They had more supporting evidence, and they, at least for me, they did not incite nearly as much emotion or uproar as would the other shows. I think this was largely due to the rhetoric used and the manner in which the issues were framed. For example, one article on Wall Street Journal talked negatively about Trump and was hopeful as to the impending testimony of Cohen, and like the results of that his testimony. However, they also addressed Cohen's questionable credibility, and so they included both sides of the issue. Although they certainly leaned in favor of a liberal approach, they did at least show both sides. What else? In this project, I found how powerful rhetoric is, and like how when it is implemented, what messages are conveyed. It's really amazing to me. Like CBS and Situation Room were very generous in their use of like emotionally inciting and sensationalized terms such as fear mongering. They used that about Trump, and they talked about the national emergency declaration as a lawless act of Trump. And these like terms immediately make viewers think a certain thing, and they communicate a certain message. And oftentimes they're very convincing, as narrowcasting, like the book says, narrowcasting is rampant in news outlets. So viewers who watch, who are loyal to those programs they watch, they're often ready and willing to accept what the news reporters say as fact. So that is my project, and I need to get back. I do this.
Hey, I really liked your red blue line across the bottom. That was
Thank
that was
you.
a nice addition.
How do I mute this? Sorry.
I'm going to reclaim post. I'm not really sure why we're still seeing the last side
I
too.
do this. Oops. That's not mute.
Making Alexandra the host. I was really happy to hear Alice say she enjoyed it. I hope you all did. I hope it gave you some insight to, there used to be this guy named Paul Harvey, and he was on the radio. If you ask your parents about him, he'll remember him, but he would tell a story about something, and then he always ended with the tagline, "And now you know the rest of the story." And I think that's what we miss sometimes in the news, is how do we know the whole story, the rest of the story? And it's often a lot more complicated than what happens in these 3-minute sound bites. So, all right, I'm muting myself and turning it over to Alex.
Alrighty, can you all hear me? Great. Okay, so news or fake news? Now, one of the many different types of news sources are nightly news programs. Now, nightly news programs, most of them, they're sometimes called informations. They combine comedy and also news and news. And since they combine them, it attracts a large amount of people, such as people who are attracted to comedy and people who are attracted to news and want to learn what's going on. Now, I was going through a lot of them, a lot of these news programs, nightly news programs, and I found that a lot of them had a bias to them. Like NBC nightly news, they were mostly left-leaning. Many of the topics that they discussed, they were less towards what was going on recently, nationally and internationally, but they were more culture related. And CNN nightly news, this was again left-leaning, but they did cover more topics that had more relevance towards the national and international field. However, in CNN nightly news, they offered a topic, and then they had a little presentation on it, and then they sometimes had a panel where they would have discussions. However, sometimes in these discussions, most of them were one side. They only offer the discussion of one side of a topic. And another different type of news program are newspapers. And the two that I picked were the Wall Street Journal and USA Today. Now, these are two different types of papers. The Wall Street Journal, they're mostly written by business people, like people who are from Wall Street. And since it's like written by these people who have these business background, they tend to be more passionate about their field of expertise, such as the economy. And with this, they primarily report on the most recent current events, such as the so like here I have some titles from the February 27th edition, like the Vietnam Rolls put the red carpet for Kim before summit, and the Cohen testimony, and AT&T wins the Time Warner battle. And I was reading through these articles, and I found a difference between USA Today and the Wall Street Journal, but I'll come to that later. Now, USA Today, this is also left-leaning, just like many of the nightly news programs. They report on the most current events, such as Wall Street Journal, but they also cover source topics that aren't really covered by many different types of papers. Like one of the titles that they covered was the transgender troops treatment that costs $8 million, and how this can affect the battle readiness of the U.S. Army and the U.S. Armed Forces. Now, back to the difference that I mentioned before. So I was reading through their article about Donald Trump and Mr. Kim doing the nuclear negotiations in Hanoi, Vietnam. And what I noticed was that in the Wall Street Journal, they focused more on what happened in the past. Like they talked a little bit about what's going to happen and why this is happening for the second time, but they focused primarily more on what happened in the past negotiation. And like with the first time round where Donald Trump made history by being the first president to have a sit-down negotiation with the president of North Korea. However, in USA Today, they didn't focus more on what was happening in the past, but more on what was going to happen. For example, they focused more on what was going to happen, when it was happening, what's going to be on the agenda, and how this and the different types of outcomes that may affect America and the world as we know it. Now, another type of news is international news, and so news that comes from different places around the globe. And the one that I chose was UK Daily Mail. Now, I don't know, I think most of you are well acquainted with BBC News and different types of news, but I kind of like the UK Daily Mail because they have like some, fun topics, but also some relevant topics. For example, however, I did find like a bias in their information. Like, although it's the United Kingdom, and you can't really say like, oh, it has a liberal bias, well, it has a conservative bias as it is in America. But I still think that I'm not very well acquainted with the political system in the United Kingdom, but I think that there's like a liberal party and a conservative party. And so this type of news program has a more liberal bias. But an interesting thing that I found about this is that they cover a lot of information that happens in America. Like most of the newspapers and nightly news programs and online news stuff that happens in America doesn't really get reported in America, and different countries from outside America, they report on what is happening. And what I just find interesting is that many of these newspapers, I was wondering on why they don't report on these topics. And it's, kind of interesting. But then again, it usually sets the narrative and doesn't always give an unbiased report. Like I was reading through, I think yesterday night, I was reading through their update, and they had a lot on the Cohen testimony. Like there was like half a half of their thing was like what was happening with the Cohen testimony and all the different topics that Cohen was discussing. Now, my last one are online news programs. Now, the one I chose was BuzzFeed and the Jamestown Foundation. Now, BuzzFeed, I think you all know, is a completely biased program and is mostly written by individuals and not professionally trained journalists. Now, that being said, many of the articles, they're written more towards the individual's more personal preferences and political ideologies. So, however, I do find some of the topics like a fun read. Like that, this is where I discovered of the baby shower and the royal family, and how like it was not like right for them to have this baby shower, and that like all these important people showed up, and it was like, oh, it's amazing and terrible at the same time. So, I mean, they focused more on modern culture and celebrities and like other trivial topics, and not more on the like hard-hitting topics that are happening, like the Cohen testimony, the Trump negotiations, the Pakistan-Indian nuclear deal. But then again, the articles that are written on these topics, they're more biased. Now, I'm going to also talk about the Jamestown Foundation. Now, y'all may not be very well acquainted with this, but I kind of follow it a bit. It's a bit left-leaning and biased, as a lot of these news programs are. But so I'm going to give you some backdrop on it. It was originally started to help Soviet defectors coming to America. Like, they supported these defectors, and they were like raising awareness on what is happening over in the East. Like, it helps Americans like see trends of what is happening in Eastern Europe and Asia. Like, for example, a lot of the articles that they write about is the pseudo war between Ukraine and Russia, where Russia like already took over, I think, 2 or 3 oblasts in Ukraine, and how this is affecting Ukrainian nationality, and how this may actually start a third world war if it gets out of hand. And now this is like a more narrowly focused news source, as it just like focuses on Eastern Europe and Asian news, such as like the Ukraine, Russia, Moldova, like Belarus, and like the Baltics and such. So, yeah. Now, I do want to like a more narrowly focused topic. Now, I was really attracted to the Trump and Kim nuclear negotiations. Now, this has been like a hot topic that's been picked up by American news and international news. But there have been like a lot of bad speculation that's been going on. Now, as you all probably know, the Trump and Kim deal went south because Trump bailed out because because they couldn't come to terms on the sanctions. And now a lot of the news programs right now, they were portraying Mr. Kim as like being an offstandish guy, like a person who would be really hard to make a deal with. And a lot of these programs, they were like saying, oh, since Kim is like this, Trump can't. He's not the right kind of person to deal with these type of negotiations. That like, oh, why is he our president? And like this is like framing. Like they're taking the one part that was happening that Trump failed, or that like Trump didn't come to like a conclusion with Mr. Kim about the nuclear deal, and that this means that Trump is not a good person, and that he's not the right kind of person to deal with these types of high stakes negotiations. Now, I do also want to talk about the I think it was the Colton. Oh boy, I can't remember the name of it, but this is bad. But there was Yeah, I think it's the Colton problem. It was the one where there was this celebrity that was allegedly attacked by Trump supporters. Now, the media came into like agenda priming and just went into like an all-out media frenzy. What was happening was, yes, Smollett, sorry. Hey, what can I say? I'm talking a lot. So, yeah, the Smollett. So what was happening was that, yes, he staged an attack, and the media just went like all out crazy. And what was happening was that they were reporting on facts that had not been fact checked. Like they were saying that he was attacked by Trump supporters and like people who were against like Islamophobes and people who didn't like LGBT, and like they were like, and with this, since it was classified as a hate crime, the FBI and the police, they were all involved in what was happening, and this was detracting them from more important cases more important cases and problems that were happening. So yeah, that's my little spiel on what's the types of stuff and what's going on. Now, I want to come up with some concluding thoughts. So as I was like binging on nightly news programs and wasting a lot of time reading through like tons of newspapers, I'm kind of disappointed in how journalism has come and how it is like how it works today. Because in my opinion, there's just too much bias. Like they all appeal to either the liberal side, like a liberal and left leaning, or they're either right leaning. There are very few programs that are unbiased. And that being said, there are plenty of fake news to go around. And I think one person that's been very local about this is Donald Trump. As you all know, in his tweets, he's calling like CNN fake news and different types of news programs fake news. And I think that he is partially correct. I think that we need to fix the journalism the way it is. Like we need to fix it. Like we need to make journalism great again. Haha, no pun intended. But we need to because the way news should be is that the news, it should just present the facts, and then the people have to come up and formulate their own opinion on what is happening, and therefore they aren't going to be biased, or their opinion is going to be tainted by the news programs and newspapers and online news sources that we have today. And yeah, that is all I have. I hope you all enjoyed it. Kind of went a bit overboard, but I hope it was worth it.
Ella, you said that. I think the number's actually a lot higher now. I think it's more like 90% of all journalists are registered Democrats. So it's been a huge increase. I might have that number slightly off, but I feel like I just heard a statistic, and it was from a liberal source, like The Economist. I heard someone, it was Dennis Miller, I think, can sometimes be obnoxious, talking about making a red hat that looks like a MAGA hat, but just says it's just a red hat. Since red hats tend to make people really mad. The book said that conservative sources are more it's just the statistics don't support it. I mean, there's almost no conservative journalists. It's very similar to what we see in like Hollywood and other places. People tend to hire people that are like them. So you get into a place where if you are just last week, Chris Pratt got attacked for being a Christian. And it's not exactly like you would call Chris Pratt a conservative Christian, but he is a Christian, and they had a go at him for it, So, it's a really difficult place if you don't fall into sort of the modern era zeitgeist of thinking. It's the big paradox of the age of tolerance is they're tolerant of everyone except those whom they disagree with. They're not very tolerant of those people. All right, I think we've got William. Make you the host. And Yaya, are you going today? Okay, so I think, is that the last two? Did I forget anybody else? And Henry, you're going today. Okay, great. All right.
Okay, can you see my screen right now? Or can you hear me? Okay. Awesome. One sec. Okay, so my title may seem a little bit weird, but it's what really stuck out to me as I researched for this presentation, because news organizations, from what I found, love to cherry pick the information that best fits what they're trying to communicate, not really what the actual news is. So for my nightly news programs, I watched Tucker Carlson's show, Tucker Carlson Tonight, on Fox News, along with the Rachel Maddow show on MSNBC. And the main issue they really covered was Cohen's testimony before Congress. And I found that both sides picked quotes and sound bites that really fit what they wanted to portray and supported their narratives. The Maddow show, which is left-leaning, showed quotes that cast aspersions on Trump, while the Tucker Carlson Tonight show, which leans to the right, showed quotes that cleared Trump of wrongdoing, such as there's no definitive proof of Russia collusion, according to Cohen, according to this quote. As far as they went, I thought both shows were telling the quote-unquote truth, but they weren't telling the whole truth, which is a problem, in my opinion. What I found ironic is that Cohen swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And the news programs didn't tell the whole truth when reporting on Cohen. So they basically just framed the issues in the ways that they wanted to. I thought that Tucker Carlson did seem to attack Democrats more than Maddow did the Republicans. For example, he had a Democratic strategist on, I believe, Thursday. And he interrupted him a couple times and seemed to cut short the segment, I thought. He also did have Tulsi Gabbard on, who's running for president, of course. And he seemed to be pretty respectful of her, which was good. But in essence, the shows just presented their side of the information. And as I was doing my research, I found a Washington Post opinion piece that summed it up well, I thought. It said, quote, "As a Trump insider describes a con man president, both sides see a liar who proves their point." And that's what they really went for. So for my print sources, I used the New York Times and the Washington Post. Both of these tend to lean towards the left. Trump's described them as the failing New York Times and the fake news. I believe I got that right. The fake news Washington Post. As an example, the front page of the Times on Thursday described Republicans as assailing the Cohen hearing. Gosh, I can't talk. Sorry. And the top definition for assail on Google is to, quote, make a violent and concerted attack upon, which didn't strike me as the most balanced description. Then for my international source, I used The Guardian, which is a UK newspaper and website, excuse me. And it's described as leaning hard to the left, and I agree with that. It's pretty strongly anti-Trump. Sorry, I lost my place. And it does feature a good deal of British news, mostly British news, usually Brexit. It's usually bashing Theresa May. But it also talks pretty frequently about U.S. politics. And, well, their top opinion pieces included titles like these. Quote, "Trump's a racist con man, and that's the brand America bought." Quote, "The Hanoi summit collapse reaffirms Trump's amateur hour in diplomacy," and others along those same lines. So my online-only sources were the Huffington Post and BuzzFeed, and both of these sources, much like most of the others, lean to the left on the political spectrum, especially the Huffington Post. One of the Huffington Post's top headlines was, "Trump learns that love letters from a murderous dictator don't mean much." And I thought that was pretty indicative of the rest of the site. I don't love Trump, and I certainly wouldn't defend everything he does, but none of the top headlines on the site have anything good to say about him, instead focusing on the negatives. BuzzFeed's along the same lines. It features a ton of pop culture, often to the exclusion of other things, but it does feature articles that tend to frame the right in a negative light and focuses on the positive sides of the Democrats. So overall, I found that framing issues and agenda setting were relentlessly present in the media sources that I found. Every site and channel framed the issues and evidence to support their own narratives to the extent that it would be hard to single one out as doing the most. I did think agenda setting was most prevalent in some of the Fox News segments, as Trump's infamous "no collusion" line popped up several times, I thought, when describing his relationship with Russia. In print media versus television, the print media had more time to formulate opinions and present a slightly more nuanced perspective, while the TV often seemed to be focused on specific sound bites. I was surprised by the fact that I didn't really see AP and Reuters citation for the print articles, as you mentioned in the description of the assignment. But like, as an overall opinion, the news outlets definitely could be better. I would love to see unbiased reporting, but I thought it was present in every single news media site, paper, and video clip that I looked at while I was researching. Again, the main thing that stuck out to me is that the news outlets cherry pick their information to fit their narrative. And while what they're presenting may be the truth, it's not the whole truth, and that's what matters. And that's about all I got.
Right, they're back to my old rest of the story, right? Now I'm gonna Harvey. What did I say? Is Paul Harvey in the rest of the story? Yes, there's always something missing. All right, we've got Henry left, and is that it? Is there a lot? And yeah. Right. The one thing that's been really interesting for me, I follow British news very closely, and I have a number of British friends because we lived there. They all hate Trump. I mean, just legitimately. But they would have a go at the Conservative Party in the United States regularly for sticking their nose into international business, and then now they yell at Trump for wanting to pull out of being sort of the international policeman. So it's sort of like a no-win situation. You know, it doesn't really matter what he does because they don't want to like him. So it seems very personal to me. I mean, I think you can make a legitimate argument for why you should be involved on the international stage, and I would make that argument from kind of a neo-realist perspective, because there's no such thing as any neutral play. So you get uninvolved, somebody else gets involved. But you can make the argument, you know, well-meaning people can make the opposite argument. What bugs me is when you change your argument based on the person. You know, I mean, you're either one or the other. So, all right. We are getting close, my friends. We got Henry, and then we've got, yeah. I made you the host, Henry, so you should be able to pull the slide up from the bottom. I like that. Now look at how much makeup Sean Hannity wears. Somebody's gone a little crazy with men makeup in the news. I'm just saying, look at both of those guys. They're faking their face. Fake faces is fake news, right?
Yeah. All right, so I'll start off with my television news. For that, I started with the first one I'll start with is Hannity on Fox News. this does have an obvious pronounced conservative bias. As you can see in this slide here, it's kind of hard. You can, hold on, let me see. But in case you can't read that, it says anything for power and then has the Democrats' donkey. That makes it very clear. This is the #1 cable news program and averages, from what I've seen, over 3 million viewers from what I was able to find online. That seems like an awful lot. And then the next one over on MSNBC was Hardball with Chris Matthews. This one has a pronounced liberal bias, and this mostly focused on the Cohen hearings and how it was going to be devastating for Trump's presidency. And I don't know if I didn't count, but there was a lot. I don't know how many times over the course of that show he used the words President Trump and liar in the same sentence together. If I were to count, it would be an awful lot. This one averages around 1.5 to 2 million viewers, so not quite as popular as Hannity, but still quite substantial. Now, out of these, I watched C-SPAN as my third television news source. This one, I liked it an awful lot. This was unbiased because there was no commentary on the show I watched. It was just reporting. It was not reporting. It was just showing the day's proceedings in Congress, just the goings on there, no commentary or anything, so kind of hard to be biased when you're not giving any commentary. Now, I did choose some interesting, or at least I believe that they're interesting, online sources. The first I'll talk about is the Huffington Post. This one has quite a liberal bias. It is one of the largest online news sources. They seem to be mostly fangirling over Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her Green New Deal and her socialist programs. This one has 80 million unique visitors per month. So monthly, not daily, that's an important distinction to make, making it one of the largest online news sources. The next one has quite a conservative bias, Breitbart. This has 60 million, making it the second largest from what I was able to find online conservative news sources. It was founded by Andrew Breitbart, who died 7 years ago, I think today, actually, from what I was seeing, or at least around this time, 7 years ago. This one, I say, is generally associated with the alt-right, which is different than the alt-right. I think it was Andrew Breitbart that said, when he was still alive, obviously, that it was the main news source for the alt-right, though that term has evolved since then and now means something different than it did when Andrew Breitbart was alive. So that's an important distinction to make. Just to give a quick summary, the alt-right essentially believes that immigration laws should be designed to protect culture and preserve it from significant changes. And whereas the alt-right believes that immigration laws should be designed around on a racial basis and preserving racial purity. So there is a pretty significant difference between the two. Breitbart falls into the alt-right side of things, so that's an important distinction to make. Now, the third one is quite an interesting case. This is InfoWars, run by Alex Jones. This one has 9 million viewers, which is more than I was expecting, because it's portrayed by the more mainstream media outlets like MSNBC or the Huffington Post as being quite out there, which, to be fair, it is on the sort of Overton window, so to speak. This one it's mostly centered around a distrust of government, which is probably not entirely unfounded, though some of this gets a little bit questionable. Like vaccines and like the belief that the government is giving people vaccines to do whatever, I don't even know what specifically, and fluoride in the water is put out to keep people from reproducing. In watching Alex Jones, it does seem to me that he is given a bit of a bad rap by the media. He seems to make and clips of him are often taken out of context. Like, for example, he says things in a hyperbolic, inflammatory, and sensationalist way so that it seems kind of ridiculous, but when you look at it, it often has basis in truth, or at least a more serious opinion. Like, one example of this would be, he said at one point that Hillary Clinton has killed thousands of children, which CNN took that clip and showed it and talked about what a lunatic this guy was, is essentially what they were showing. But if you were to look at the actual clip, he says that, but then he goes on to say that he has supported, or her policies, Hillary's policies have led to the rise of terrorist groups that have killed children, which is, people would argue with that for sure, but it is at least not as silly as saying Hillary Clinton has killed thousands of children. So essentially a sensationalistic, hyperbolic statements is what they specialize in, which gives them a bad reputation, though it's not entirely undeserved, but there is more serious side to it. Now, for my international source, I did the BBC. This, you can, I can't really see that. But this has a liberal bias based in Westminster. I was interested to see that the BBC was the largest broadcaster in the world by number of staff, and I think it's close to the largest by number of viewers. It has 20,000 staff overall, which is quite large. It is funded by the UK government, which I found to be interesting. I didn't really know that before. I haven't kept up with the BBC too much, just kind of paid attention to it. Kept an eye on it, not that close though. But overall, I would say that the liberal sources focused on the Cohen testimony over the time period I watched them, rather than the North Korea summit, which is what programs like Hannity focused on. And overall, there was a clear bias on both sides. Which is, anytime there's commentary, you'll have bias. You can't really avoid that. C-SPAN, though, did, because they just eliminated, for the portions I watched, they just eliminated the commentary, which is certainly a good thing in a way, but it's hard to get the whole picture without the commentary. Ideally, you would take sources like Breitbart and sources like Huffington Post and get for each one you would get half of the argument, but when you put them together, you can get the whole story. All right, that's about it.
Thanks, Henry. Good information. I'm going to give Yaya the host. Yaya, you're presenting? Yep. I just think one of the things that's most important for us to understand, and I was listening to this piece on North Korea this morning, and the North Korea media, it's illegal to have any religion or be in possession of any religious information at all in North Korea, because the official state religion is that the Kim dynasty is deity. So that even after Kim Jong-un's dad died, he was appointed to a post because he's allegedly like a dead king now that's living in eternity because he's a god. So they believe that the Kim family are godlike creatures, and that in order for North Korea to stand, there must be a Kim on the throne. So obviously Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, none of those things would support Kim being deified. But you realize, I thought about it today, I thought there's probably a lot of people in North Korea that would be fearful of Kim Jong-un not being the leader anymore, even though he's awful. They're sort of limited in the media that they have. I saw there's a great video I should try to post for you guys that got leaked out of North Korea, showing that it was a North Korean video showing that Americans are all having to make their coffee from snow outside, and that every Tuesday we all eat the birds out of our trees because we don't have any food, and that North Korea is providing food for us via the Red Cross, and it's really awful here in America, but that's the world they live in. So without a free press and without an honest press, we all get a very distorted view of truth, and it really is sort of similar to what Will said, is there's pieces of it that are true, but not everything. So it's really important for all of you to be wise and looking and searching and digging for information as you're coming to logical conclusions about stuff. All right, we're all so far past time, so I'll stop talking and we have yeah. Henry, I think you're still unmuted too. So gotta get, there we go. Yeah, are you, I don't hear you. Are you talking?
Hello?
There you go. Yep. All right.
Okay. I guess I'll just get started. So this was a very interesting assignment for me. I think I probably will sound like a broken record at this point because I'm basically going to be saying a lot of the same things that a lot of you guys said. But I chose for my two nightly news programs, ABC and NBC. As I said here, I basically didn't watch two nightly news programs. I basically watched one nightly news program because watching both of them was almost the same as just watching one of them. They were almost exactly the same. And they're almost exactly the same because they're both rated, they're both kind of left-leaning. Actually, before I continue, I'd just like to say that for my project, I used this website called Media Bias/Fact Check, and I used it on all of the websites that I did. I'm not sure of the bias of the actual bias rating website, but it rates the bias of these websites. So both ABC and NBC scored left center. That I could see that. One of the interesting things was that basically for all 3 days that I followed them, two headlines dominated like half of the entire broadcast, and that is the Hanoi Summit and the Cohen hearings, as you guys are probably aware. I was pretty surprised that not that much Trump bashing took place for the Hanoi Summit on the ABC and NBC, at least compared to what I expected. And I feel like that's probably because most Americans have the same opinion on North Korea, so they don't really have too much of a problem with that. And I thought the amount of focus on Cohen's testimony was just completely out of proportion. Just 3 days, and all they could talk about was the Cohen hearings. That's just too much. I mean, it's compared to how important other things. I mean, as everybody else mentioned, or as a few other people mentioned, the India-Pakistan issues and stuff. So that was the nightly news. For my newspapers, I used Fox News and Newsweek. I'm not sure how newspapery these are, but I just looked at their online newspaper, and I basically compared them on the same topics. The first one is the Hanoi summit. Fox News says it's Fox News. It's conservative leaning. They put the headlines: "Why President Trump's Vietnam walkout is sure to spook Beijing." I'm not completely sure how the Hanoi summit has anything to do with China, but that's how Fox News spun it. But Newsweek, on the exact same topic, of course, they put it the other way. Newsweek is liberal. They said Trump's North Korea summit ends early with no deal. So the same thing happened, but very different ways of wording it. And another thing that I saw in the news on both Fox News and Newsweek is Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, has been getting some calls to resign because of apparently he's been involved, or at least allegedly involved, in a bribery scandal. And Fox News is a conservative website, of course. Look at this long headline: Dodge's calls to resign amid former Attorney General's allegations in bribery scandal, versus Newsweek, which just says Trudeau faces calls to resign. It's pretty clear what the bias is for these two news sources. So I chose, for my online sources, I chose Reuters and Business Insider. And both of these I decided to pick because I thought maybe I'd try to stay away from pop culture, maybe try to go for some online websites that usually have a reputation for being a little more business-oriented. Business Insider is generally left-center, but I was actually surprised to see that Reuters was rated least biased, so that wasn't too bad. I was a bit disappointed. There was mostly political articles, just like any other, and Reuters had a article on Huawei, the telecom giant in China, but other than that, it just had to do with the same things: the Hanoi summit, the Cohen hearings. I mean, I'm not sure what the Cohen hearings has to do with business, but that's what they had. And if you look at their main page, the fourth category is politics, but it's like world, like business, economy, whatever, and then politics, but it should be like politics, and then business or something, because they were really just doing politics. And the fact checker, I thought, was pretty accurate. They didn't have any clear biases. I thought maybe they were a little bit left leaning, but nothing like any of the others that I've seen today, that I saw in the previous few days. Business Insider was better at focusing on economic issues, but they were still, but they were more leaning. They were liberal leaning. So when they did report on political issues, which was, of course, the majority, they had a pretty clear liberal bias. For my international news source, I picked The Economist. It's a British newspaper. It has a pretty good record, according to the Media Bias and Fact Check. It's rated least bias, and according to them, it has never failed a fact check before. So that's nice. At least seems like they rigorously check their facts before just posting them. I read their headlines for a few days and some of their articles, and I agree with that. They generally stay away from politics, but being a British newspaper, not a American newspaper, they focused a little more on international news. They had stories of what's going on in Europe. They had stories of North and South America, Asia, Middle East. They had some stories about like elections in Africa, stuff that going on with Israel, and all sorts of things that make it a much more worthy news source, I felt. And they stayed away from pop culture, which is my favorite thing about them. I just don't dig the whole celebrities thing. I don't feel like it's something that should be on the headlines. If I wanted that, I'd go to People or something, People magazine. But that's what I liked about these news sources. So in recap, the economic newspapers tend to focus less on pop culture and infotainment. There's still a whole lot of infotainment, but at least not like the purest news-free celebrity stuff. The nightly news sources were just basically totally infotainment. More, I feel like the news sources, maybe because they're on TV, were more infotainment, but the newspapers were more biased. As someone else noted, it seems like with the higher viewership, the slightly lower bias. I actually think that is true as well. And my favorite was the international paper, because reading American newspapers is just not a good way to know about what's going on in the whole world. You're really going to have to go somewhere else. And I thought that The Economist did a pretty good job. And that's it.
Thank you. Yeah. I think I've mentioned before, you guys, The Economist has a student subscription. So if you're interested, I'd encourage you to do that. And they have a little app every morning I look at called the Espresso. And you can just, what's the hot thing for that exact day? And then I also, I get The Economist and I listen to it. So they don't like Trump, and they do, the great thing about British newspapers, they don't pretend that they're trying to be neutral and then kind of having a sideways. If they don't like something, they just say it right out. So like they'll say, this paper believes, yuck, 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 which is, you know, at least it's an honest, you know, addressing of an issue. They can't find anything nice to say about Trump ever, except for some of the tax and policy reliefs that have to happen. They're socially very liberal, but I do think of all the papers and news outlets, they're probably one of the most honest. So, and like Yaya said, the most important thing if you listen to or read The Economist is you find out about what's going on in the whole rest of the world. So they break it out in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Asia, they always have a specific article they focus on or issue. This week is China. And economy, I believe. And China's economy is their essay this week. But they always have the U.S., the Americas, Asia, books. So it's a good news source. I know that's not what you're all going to ask for your birthday, but maybe. Thank you guys. It was great to hear from you. I know that there was a few that saw and noticed the same things. That shouldn't be surprising. And next week we're going to talk about local government. I'm going to open up today the rest of the work until we go on spring break. There's really not a lot of work to do next week because your book doesn't have local government as a chapter. You're not going to have a test on it. But please don't skip it. It's important information. I want you to know it. So come to class next week or watch the video. And thanks again. Really appreciate everybody stepping out and doing their project. Take care, guys. I'll post our video. Bye, guys. I'll send it out today.